I'm just going to touch that onto the paper within that dark blue highlight I've got. Hi everyone, I'm Mike. I'm an artist based in the UK. I paint a wide range of subjects, mostly using acrylic and or watercolour. Most of the videos I publish are either real-time demos or painting tutorials, but I do have the odd plein air adventure and the odd adventure into the surreal on the channel as well. So in terms of materials for this particular painting, apart from a decorator's brush, which I use to put the background in, I'm mostly going to be using this little 1/2 inch synthetic flat. And you can see it's pretty frayed, but that's going to be advantageous for creating, kind of different kind of fluffy marks or feather-like marks. I've got a small round brush, also synthetic, and then a small liner brush as well. And then equally as important for the way I paint is this water spray bottle. And then for the first stage of the painting, I'm going to be using conventional acrylics. So these are De La Rowney System 3 acrylics. So I've got titanium white, burnt umber, cadmium red, cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, cad yellow, and fluorescent orange. And then for the second stage of the painting, I will be switching to my Chroma Atelier interactive paints. So these are also acrylic. So I've got tinting white, cadmium red medium, cadmium yellow light. This pot is titanium white. So the difference between the titanium white and the tinting white is this one is more translucent and has a little bit of iridescence to it. Not much, but there's a little bit there. And then we've got cerulean blue, burnt umber, and French ultramarine blue. The paper today is De La Rowney A2 mixed media paper. So A2 is around about 23 by 16, 17 inches or so. So it's pretty decent size, one of my favourite formats to work on. Okay, so I've got my A2 mixed media paper, and I've used a Unipin marker, 0.2mm nib, to loosely put down a sketch of this bird on top of a branch. I've changed some of the details from the reference, changed the branch a little bit, and the main thing I wanted to focus on was positioning the bird within the rectangle of the paper, so that because it's looking to the right, I've kind of left a little bit of space here on the right as well, so it kind of just leaves room for the bird to be kind of pointing at something. The background is painted with a combination of cerulean blue and titanium white, conventional acrylic, and I've been careful to just vary the intensity of the blue and the amount of white I've got in the mix. So for example, generally speaking, I've kind of made things a little darker around the head to give me a little extra contrast, and a little paler down here, but I haven't been too fussy about it. So now I'm going to continue with a 1/2 inch flat synthetic brush, carrying on with the conventional acrylics, but I am just going to spray the surface of the painting with a little bit of water, if I can find my spray bottle. There it is. And I'm just going to come in with some burnt umber, and we'll start to add some of this dark tone to the darkest areas. So by doing this, it's a reasonably efficient way to just set up a sense of light and dark, give the impression that we're looking at a 3D object rather than just a shape, some shapes and lines on the paper. And spraying the surface of the water means that when I put the paint down, especially with this rather old frayed synthetic brush, you can see that I'm getting kind of a multitude of micro brush strokes. So that helps to create a kind of feather-like texture automatically. And you know, some of those will show through in the final painting, possibly. But if they don't, it's not a big deal because, you know, it's so quick to do. It's not like I've slaved away with a tiny brush to create that effect. So that's one of the main reasons I spray the surface of the painting with water. The other is that with conventional acrylic especially, if you paint onto dry paper, and this paper's got a light texture to it, so that adds to the effect I'm about to describe. Kind of the paint runs out, if that makes sense, you know, rather quickly. So I'll be doing a brush stroke like that, and then it'll kind of run out, and then you get a textured dry brush effect, which can be great, you know, if that's what you want. It's very, very, very cool effect. So there you see, by moving the brush a little bit faster, I can deliberately get a bit of dry brush. But all these little effects you get by changing the way you apply the paint, in general, I think it's like the most efficient way to go. I much prefer this style of painting to, you know, working away with the tiniest brush and just building up things very slowly. So I just use a bit of dry brush effect there to hint at the kind of speckled pattern on the bottom of the neck and the front of the chest. I'm going to mimic that technique now on the branch. And I've got a little bit of a fleck of burnt umber there, which flicked down accidentally onto my background. So I'm going to turn that into part of a little twig. So we've got some dark and light across most of the painting. I could almost add some actually to the legs and feet, so perhaps I'll do that. Just very gently, just a little bit of dry brush. There's not much paint left on the brush. So now what I want to do next is come in even darker. So I'm going to mix up some more burnt umber, but this time add some ultramarine blue. So I'm going in a ratio of about 2:1 burnt umber to the blue. I'm going to spray the surface of the painting again just lightly with water. Now it's a pretty warm day here in the UK, so that first layer of paint I'm expecting to be almost completely dry, although it may have lasted a little longer than normal because, you know, I was painting onto that damp surface. But what we'll do, we'll stick with the same brush and we'll just begin, without being too sort of fussy about it, begin to add a few more, or a few areas of super dark. So another little spray with a water bottle. And I just cleaned my brush out, and now I'm going to switch to some fluorescent orange. Now the colour of orange that's on the bird in real life isn't anywhere near as bright as this, but I just kind of fancy the idea of putting some of this fluorescent orange down. And I may end up reducing the brightness of that later on, but like I say, I just quite like the idea of putting that pop of really bright colour in. I think it works very well against the cerulean blue background. And the way I'm feeling at the moment, having just done that, is if I keep everything else fairly subdued and realistic in colour, then I think that's going to make for a nice focus, nice bright focus for the rest of the painting. But, you know, we'll see what happens. Okay, so next up, a bit of titanium white. So next up I've got a bit of titanium white, touch of cad red, touch of cad yellow, and just a hint of burnt umber. And for now, I will come in and put some highlights on this area, but for now I just want to block out the white of the paper that I've left exposed on areas of the head and chest. And that same colour I think will work reasonably well on the legs. And then for the branch, I'm going to add a little bit more red to that mixture and a little bit more cad yellow. A bit more of the red, I think. Touch of the burnt umber. And let's see what that looks like. I'm not overly fussed about getting the colour exactly right, but well, that's not too bad actually. So again, I'm going to, it's going on a little heavier than intended down on this bottom right end, but that's okay. But I am losing all of those dry brush marks that I put down before, which wasn't really the plan. So what we'll do is just put it down a little more. Softly as we go to the left. So I'm hoping, it's amazing sometimes that you put what you feel is loads of paint on the brush and it runs out when you don't want it to. In this case, I feel like I don't have that much and it's just flowing forever and completely putting down an opaque layer. But I mean, it's not a big deal. It's I can put the texture back in again in a moment. So if that's what the paint wants to do, we'll go with that. And block in the branch, but I'm going to deliberately leave little sections exposed here. So I quite like, even in a finished painting, having areas which are perhaps just hinted at. So for example, I don't mind that it kind of like peters out here and all we can see is a little bit of what I put down first. I think, yeah, I mean, I might add a little touch of orange over here, or this orangey brown over here, and perhaps a touch there. It's okay, so it is running out now. There we go. Well, and we'll see what that looks like when it dries back. So I'm going to let that whole layer of paint dry now, and then we'll come back in and start working on some more detail. Okay, well, that first layer of paint is dry and I've just sprayed the head area with water. So the next thing I want to do is actually complete the bill or the beak there. So I'm grabbing some titanium white and then a little bit of the cerulean blue and a bit of the burnt umber, and that's given me a kind of bluey grey. Which at the moment isn't quite dark enough, but for the highlight colour, it's not a million miles away. So I'm just going to add, so that's the colour I've got at the moment, just going to add a little bit of burnt umber, a bit more of the blue, a bit more of the burnt umber. I think that's going in the right direction now. That's a bit more like it. So again, grabbing burnt umber, and I've switched to a, as you probably noticed, I've switched to a small round brush now for the detailed areas. So just going to fill in the eye with burnt umber. This is just my kind of starter colour. We'll come back to that in a bit. Going back to my flat brush now. I'm picking up some titanium white just on the tips of the brush. And then back to the round brush, and this time going with some of the fluorescent orange, but I'm going to add some of the cadmium yellow to it. Let's get a bit more. Perhaps mix that up a little too watery, but I think it'll be okay for now. It's so sort of fluid, it's difficult to see, and I've got my kind of studio lights on the painting. A little bit difficult to see how that's going to work when it's dried back, so we'll leave that for the moment and instead take that same orange. Let's go over here, one of the small parts of the palette which isn't a mess, and going to put some red mixed in with that orange. So now a mix of ultramarine blue and burnt umber, about a 50-50 mix this time. To really darken some of these areas. and it's a little bit translucent, this mix. So for that reason, I think I'm going to be able to get away with applying it over here for the beginnings of some darker shadows. And when I put it over the top of the orange, I think when everything dries back, some of that warmth will show through. Now, while I've got that on the brush, I mean, I'm fairly close, I think, to switching to my interactive acrylics. But while we've got the conventional acrylics on the go, and I've got this dark colour, I'm just going to take the opportunity to darken some of these shadows further. Try and stay fairly free in terms of my mark making and the way I apply the paint. Just going to move the camera a little bit for you. Okay, so I've switched to my interactive acrylics now. Same small round brush. And this is a mix of burnt umber, cad red deep, cad yellow, and a little bit of tinting white. So one of the cool things about using the conventional acrylic first is that once it's dry, it's an absolutely lovely surface to paint on, especially with the interactives. And the way I tend to work with detail is, even though I'm putting this colour down in areas that aren't really appropriate, what I find is if I've got a colour which is pretty close in tone, then I'll put that down kind of everywhere I can in the general area, and then I'll come back in a minute and change things where needed. For me, I find that's a pretty efficient way to work. Okay, so next some of the yellow, some of the white, and a touch of the red. Now I want to keep some of that fluorescent orange showing through if I can, so I'm going to be fairly restrained with my application of that colour. Then going to add a little more red to that mix. To create a strong orange, no longer fluorescent, because I'm not even sure if they do fluorescent colours for the interactive acrylics, actually. Something I ought to look into, because I find the fluorescents are fantastic for achieving certain effects, and if they had them as an interactive, that really would be very, very cool from my point of view. Now this colour I've mixed up here has come out a little darker than intended, so what I'll do is make use of it in other areas. I'll add a bit of white to that colour and a little bit of the yellow. Go back round. Now, when I'm dealing with the eye, if I look at it, I can see basically there are quite a few areas which are really quite a strong dark brown. But the way I paint eyes is I generally speaking, you know, not always, but I generally speaking use pure ultramarine blue to replace the darkest colours. So we'll give that a go and you know, see if it works, and then if it doesn't, you know, I can always replace it. So that's beginning to bring the eye to life. I probably will go in with some super darks for the centre of the eye in a bit, but for now, fairly happy with that. But I'm going to keep going with this pure ultramarine blue. Now again, this, you know, there isn't a blue line there for the mouth, and there isn't blue shadow under the bill, but I like the way the blue's working against the little bit of fluorescent orange that's showing through. It's also allowing me to add a few wispy bits. And because it's nice and translucent, as I apply it now, it's actually giving me a really lovely but subtle green, which isn't actually too far off. There is a little bit of green. I seem to have picked up some yellow on my brush. Maybe that's why it's looking green. Oh, I don't think I managed to do that. I don't think that was actually causing the green on the bird. I think that was due to the translucency of the ultramarine and then the underlying layer. But maybe I'll be proved wrong in just a second. Yeah, maybe slightly. Difficult to tell because I've got rather more paint on the brush. But either way, that kind of worked out fairly well from my point of view. But I'm going to continue with this blue up around here. But actually, I will now deliberately add a little bit of yellow to that mix because even though it isn't green, it's kind of more of an ochreish brown, the shading in this area. I like the effect of the green, so that's what we'll do. But without don't want to go too fussy on this. So just taking care to not take too much care, if that makes sense. Vary my marks a little. And that's probably enough of that effect. So a bit of white, bit of cerulean blue, bit of burnt umber going into the mixture now. And let's see what this looks like. I quite like that colour. And I think that might work reasonably well for the highlight in the eye. Or at least the beginnings of one. Now I'm going to take I'm taking some pure white and mixing it in with that kind of orangey brown that I used, with just a little bit of that orangey brown that I used around the eye, to produce a warmer off-white colour that I'm now going to apply as the beginnings of a highlight colour. Along the top of the bill or the beak there. Now the reason I'm doing this is twofold. One, it's a reasonable representation of the highlight that's actually there in the reference, but also that sort of warmth will contrast with the very cool background that I've got. And now I'm just going to pick up some pure white on the end of my brush, if that will come into focus. There you are. You can see I've got like that little droplet hanging off, and I'm going to just put that little droplet on there so I get a very opaque little highlight within the highlight. I'm tempted to do the same in the eye, so let's see what that looks like if I do the same thing again. So again, I've got that little bead of paint. Try and get it into focus for you, hanging off the end of the brush. And I am just going to touch that onto the paper within that dark blue highlight I've got, just for the tiniest little speck of light in the eye. Now I do feel the need to darken further that pupil, but I'll do that in just a second. So what I'm going to do though, having just cleaned out my brush, is come back in with some of the pure white. And I want to be fairly restrained with this, but I want to add just a few highlights. Which are rather more opaque than the, if you remember from earlier on, I did apply some white with the flat brush. And some of those are still showing through, but we can begin to hint at some of the patterning. And notice what I'm doing is, see the dash of white there is going that way, because that's kind of forming part of a contour around the neck. Whereas when I come down to the chest, I'm going to angle them in line with the curvature of the chest. Okay, well, we need to introduce a little bit of a highlight on the top of the head, but that one needs to be quite subdued. So I'm just grabbing the burnt umber and mixing a little bit of white into that. And I may enhance that highlight beyond what it actually is in the reference if I feel it works better for my painting. So we'll see what this colour looks like now as I put it down. And I quite like that at the moment. Pop a little bit of that down here as well. Now, looking at the head that I've created so far, it isn't looking quite right in terms of the proportions. I'm not quite sure. Well, I can see what's happened, but I'm not quite sure how it happened. So I may come back in and restructure some of this at some point. Some of that may be fixed by me extending the back of the neck a little more. But for the moment, I'm fairly happy, I think. But what I am going to do now is come in with my interactives and add some more to the plumage. So, first of all, I'm going to grab some burnt umber on my little flat synthetic brush that I used earlier, and a little bit of ultramarine blue. And then I'm running the one edge of that brush, one side edge through the blue, and then we'll see what effects I get when I put this down. So adding some more curved brush strokes to hint at the direction the feathers are going in. And that's working reasonably well, I feel, in terms of the darker hues. I want to add some highlight colours to that now. And what I'm going to do is kind of do my own thing with those, just to kind of see how it works. So again, I'm just going to keep the surface of the painting fairly wet. Going to grab some ultramarine blue and just a touch of the white. And this might be too pale. We'll see what happens. Well, that's not too bad. So this is obviously not what's going on in terms of colours in the plumage, but I just thought it might make for some interesting effects. And I am going to come back in with some warmer highlights in a bit. Okay, fairly happy with that so far. And with this wet in wet technique, I can't really know for sure how well this has worked until, you know, everything's really dry. Again, keeping the painting nice and wet. So then this time I'm going to go yellow. Bit of the burnt umber. Bit of red. Oh, that's way too much red I've just added there. I always do that. So, bit of burnt umber. Bit more burnt umber. I'll spray some water onto the palette as well. Final spritz onto the painting. Let's see what we get this time. That's come out too dark, which I'm quite surprised by. So I'm adding some white. It's not too bad. But I think I can afford to go more yellow and more white. I think I need to refresh both of those on my palette. Yep, fairly happy with that colour. Perhaps a little on the green side, but it's okay. Put some hints of that down there. Again, keeping the painting nice and wet. So now I'm going to grab almost completely white just with a hint of the yellow. And a little bit of that colour that I had before. I think that should do it. We'll see what happens. It's not bad, not bad. And I'm actually going to add a little bit of that over here. Which means I'm going to have to come back in a moment and add a little bit more dark to the back of the neck. So using a mix of ultramarine blue again and burnt umber. I think that's a little bit better. So for the legs, what I can do is stick with my round brush and begin by just putting pure cad yellow down there, and do something similar there as well. And then coming back in with the orange I mixed up earlier, begin to get the colour going in the right direction. But I need to spend a little bit more time on that region to tidy that up quite a bit. So, but in terms of the body, I'm fairly happy at the moment, I think. I think what I will do, just while everything's fairly moist still, is take some of that orange, put a little bit more of the red into it, a bit more of the white, and a bit more of the yellow. And you know, I don't want to be too sort of fussy with this, but just a couple of lines down there. And yeah, I think I'm going to let that dry and we'll see what everything looks like when it's fully dry. Now what I'm doing at the moment is just adding some darker shadows on the undersides of the talons, and I've gone with relatively in keeping with the reference, I've gone with a more reddish dark shadow colour. So it's some of the cad red, burnt umber and ultramarine blue mixed together. And at the moment I'm fairly happy with how that's working. Just going to grab some tinting white and mixing that in with what I've got on the brush already. And we'll see what this looks like as a shadow colour for this more distant leg. And that works reasonably well, I think. I'm going to add some of that under there as well. So on the whole, I'm pretty happy with this one. Now, if I was looking to replicate the reference exactly, there are definitely some things which could be considered mistakes. So, for example, the lower line of the bill should be lifted, the line of the, I don't know what you want to call it really, but the hair on top of the head is, should be different. I think, generally speaking, the head should be kind of more squished and elongated. But on the whole, I'm not too worried about replicating the reference exactly. And in fact, really, compared to much of my work, this is a much closer replica of a reference in terms of color scheme than I would typically do. But on the whole, I am happy with the painting. I think I've caught a nice sense of life in the eye, and I like the addition of the pure blue here and here, the little hint of green under the bill, and I think these sort of purpley blue highlights work very well on the wing. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it for this one. Hope you enjoyed the video and hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much for watching.